Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome back to the Sound Horizons podcast presented by Toontrack. And I whisper things because our audio engineer and producer hates it. That's all the reason I need to do anything. Hey, today you're in luck. Just like anytime you tune into the podcast, we have an incredibly special individual on my computer screen. Who is it? What's he all about? International man of mystery? Cloaked in enigma? Is he someone you know? Someone you don't? Listen, I'm going to tell you this. Today, we're going to be talking to someone amazing. And why I say that is because even though maybe he's not a household name yet, I'm pretty sure you've heard many of the things he's been involved with, and I can't wait to hear his story and share it with you. So, with further ado, which was just my way of dragging this intro out for as long as I can so that all of the watch time on YouTube accumulates and we have better metrics. See how I did that? With further ado, ladies and gentlemen, today on the Sound Horizons podcast, I would like to welcome, live from the West Coast, Jacob Moreno. Dun, 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 dun. Good morning,
sir.
Thank
you for the kind intro. Great to be here.
Look, you are the only one making a sacrifice, as we just discussed today. You are up bright and early on the West Coast to talk to a couple of chuckleheads here in Chicago, and for that, we're very grateful. So, you, sir, are what I would call an engineer. Am I correct? Is that kind of where you start all of the things you do? But ultimately, is that what you call yourself? Do you call yourself composer, engineer? With all the titles, as you know, producer, composer, like it gets so convoluted, and I don't ever want to offend anyone, but I generally tend to say you work in so many different facets of the industry. Would you say that engineering is kind of a primary skill set you're known for at this point?
Yeah, I usually say audio engineer because sometimes I say engineer and people start to think I'm really smart, and it's
fair enough. So, with audio engineering, and I have to ask, you're clearly, you are a young man. So generally speaking, the younger you are, the more different the term audio engineer means as you're coming up and you're kind of deciding what you want to do for a career. So how do you, a young, intelligent man, say, you look at all the careers available in the creative field, and let's just keep in music, and produce, like I said, and you say, well, audio engineer sounds fun, which, as I'm sure you'll attest to, can sometimes be the least thankful job of any of the jobs in the industry. How do you come to that conclusion in your life? What does that look like for you?
That's a good question. Well, at first it was wanting to record my own music and other people's music and getting stuff recorded for me, and not being happy being left to someone else's skill set, because at that phase it was, I can't afford to hire a great engineer or anything like that. So it was, I don't like the way this sounds. I don't know how to make it sound good. Let's figure that out. And just sort of being fascinated by how come when that guy puts a mic up, it sounds incredible.
So frustrating.
And when I do it, it sounds like this. And, learning, there's a whole mixing process that goes on, and sort of being fascinated by that and trying to figure out, so where do I go? And I think what people fall into is recording themselves, putting out music. It doesn't take off. You record yourself some more, put out music. That doesn't take off. And so it really became, let me just get into studios and see what I can do. That felt like the most organized path there, as far as let me figure out how to even get in an environment to where I can sort of see what options there are.
Wow. So now, when you talk about just getting into studios, you're on the West Coast now? Are you originally from the West Coast, or are you from somewhere else in this beautiful country?
Yeah, I'm originally from San Diego.
Santiago.
Exactly. So a move to LA was easy. Yeah. I'm not flying across the country. There's no culture shock. If I can get a gig for a day, it's, I have a cousin or a friend's house I can stay at. Easy enough. You don't want to do the commute at 4 p.m.
No.
But early morning and nighttime is fine. It takes about an hour and a half.
Well, and the reason I ask these specific questions about your journey is because, as our viewers are about to find out when I start bringing up some of the projects you're involved in, when you talk to someone that gets the opportunities or has the experience that you have, it's always interesting to find out if those opportunities and that experience were purposeful. You know, there's people with a Michael Jordan mindset from the time they're 9, like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put in my 10,000 hours and this is it. And then there's people that are like, oh, let me see how this works. And then they find themselves in these extraordinary circumstances. If you were going to pick any extreme of those two scenarios, what would it be?
I knew from the time I can remember that it was going to be music, that I had to do something in music, and it had to be something people were going to listen to. Because, you know, you say you want to do music as a kid. Everyone says that's awesome until it starts to come time to, what are you going to do after high school?
Yeah.
But I knew it had to be music, and it couldn't be, I didn't want to stay in San Diego and record local bands. It's just not something that interested me. I don't know what it is, but I knew Los Angeles music that people are going to hear.
Okay.
So that was it. And as far as what exactly that was going to be, I had no idea.
Well, that brings up my next question. So from having no idea to finding yourself in one phase of your career and one component of your career working in the film industry on scores and movies. So that's very different than making your own music and, you know, being a songwriter or being an artist. And it's, I'm sure you can attest, it's very similar, but also a very specific skill set to be able to work on some of the projects. And I mean, you've worked on some pretty amazing music for some pretty amazing films that, again, a lot of people have heard. You know, I'm not going to name drop for you, but I'm just going to say your name might be associated with some movies like Dune or Tenet or 21 Bridges. There's a whole, like, you've done some pretty crazy, and even the films within your resume don't seem to be like, here's a cue for just a romantic kiss. It's like crazy sound design, really, like, you know, like it's not even the most average kind of things you'd find in a film. So to go from where you were just talking about, like, you knew you needed to make music people were going to hear your, how do you find yourself getting involved in and doing music for film?
So to be completely honest, what it started as was I was 20 years old when I graduated from a trade school. And no studios wanted a 20-year-old runner because I couldn't buy beer and I couldn't, you know, get those things that
so stupid
artists need. And it was, I would get interviewed by places, and I won't name names, but we'd go through it and it'd go well. And they'd say, so by the way, are you 21? And I'd say, no, I'm 20, but I'm going to be 21 in 6 months. And that was an immediate deal breaker. Now, somehow I ended up getting an interview at Hans Zimmer's remote control production studio.
Jeez.
That's, you know, a place of work and business and less, hey, let's party and have this guy go get us beer. And so that's really how that sort of ended up, is just, that was the one place that would hire me. I was always fascinated by Hans's work, and I was fascinated by orchestras. How can you not be? And so it really just, by fate or luck or whatever you want to call it, it just turned out that they were the only people that would let me work when I was 20.
Was that a nerve-wracking interview at 20, knowing who Hans Zimmer is and knowing kind of how rare that opportunity would be?
It was terrifying. Yeah. Because it was, my mentality was, if this doesn't work out, what am I going to do? I'm going to, I don't know what I'll do. I didn't have a plan B or anything. And, you know, waiting a certain period of time until I turned 21 seemed like forever. It seemed like I was wasting time. What if I forget everything I learned in trade school by the time I'm old and 21?
Right, exactly. Wow. So then from that context, you get the gig, you're going to be starting there, doing whatever you're doing. Is there a conscious effort on your part to focus on one aspect of that type of work, whether it's actually the engineering or editing, or are you just trying to take it all in at that point? Or are you saying, man, of all the things that I could do, this is really the one part of it that I want to focus on?
Looking around that campus, I saw a bunch of different rooms with a composer sitting at a desk with a keyboard in front of him and a big computer. and they were all in their own world doing their own thing. And then I saw the one room that everyone was going to was the live room and control room. And I knew that was the place I wanted to get into because I wanted to try and work with everyone there and see the different workflows. And my favorite part of working on a project had always been bringing it to life in the studio. So I quickly sort of was like, I want to be in the control room with the engineers. I want to see these scores come to life. I don't want to be learning how to quantize MIDI perfectly and give audio to people to record. So it was a pretty quick decision of I want to get in with the engineers, and along with all the other people there that were interning wanted to be composers. And so I saw a way in of, oh, well, I can be the person that wants to be an engineer.
Do you remember the moment that probably it had to have happened as you get in, you get comfortable, where you kind of had the awareness of where you were and what you were actually doing, and you thought to yourself, holy cow, like, how did this happen? Where you're just in a moment, you're like, this is surreal.
Yeah, it was my first few weeks there, and because it was, getting food and doing dishes and seeing the people and getting to be a fly on the wall, it felt less like I was a part of it and more like I was able to be a fly on the wall. It's like I felt like I was doing a live behind the scenes sort of thing. Whereas when I was taking a lunch order for an engineer, it was during a session for recording The Simpsons, because they do that there every week.
Wow.
And I remember being
week.
Every Friday. And
insane.
I remember being a kid and my parents wouldn't let me watch The Simpsons, so I'd sneak into my older sister's room where she had a little mini TV, and I'd watch it on volume 3 with my ear to it so I could hear it. And that was the moment where I was like, oh wow, I'm close to this. Wow. And the engineers were being kind to me and asking me what I knew, and I was like, oh, I can have a conversation with these guys and girls, and there's a possible route here. And that was the moment that it felt like the world opened up for me.
Wow. That's pretty huge. I mean, again, that is the revelations we come to when, for those of us in any facet of the music industry, we all have a very similar story to yours, where it's like, when you're young, you have to do music. You have no idea where the road's going to lead, but you have your idea of what you think you're going to do, right? Everyone's going to be Gene Simmons. And then they end up being, right? You end up wherever you end up. But once you get there and you do it long enough, sometimes, like even in our side of the industry, you kind of take for granted where you are and you forget some of the dreams you have and how fortunate you are to be doing what you're doing. And I would have to think in your situation, again, I mean, you knew you wanted to do it, you went to school for it, you came out, you tried one angle, didn't work, and then you found this other angle. So now you find yourself maybe a little farther away from that original, I'm going to be a rock star, or I'm going to be a writer, or I'm going to be whatever it is. And at some point in time, you fully commit to this journey now. You're like, okay, well, this is the opportunity I was handed for my skill set, and I've been learning. What's the first big break for you to work on a film from behind the desk or in any capacity other than being that fly on the wall?
The first big break was I asked if I could sit in on a session with an engineer and said, can I just sort of watch what's going on? And he was kind of cautious because I think they'd hired engineers that secretly wanted to get in with composers. So it was, what do you know about engineering? And just a few questions. And I still remember them. It was, 1, what's that mic that's up there? And then 2, we keep our pre's in the live room instead of the control room. Why might that be? And it was, That's a great question. And it was the signal to noise ratio. I was like, you're running less at mic level with that. And they were like, okay, you can sit in on the session. And then I said, when it was ending, I said, can I break down your session for you? And they were like, sure. And started talking to me more and seeing that I just wanted to help. And that day, I think it was we're going to talk to the studio manager and get you a job.
Wow.
And that was, it felt like my world changed.
I can imagine, but I have to say, given the way you've told the story, I can't be surprised. I'm fairly certain many people have been in your situation and not offered that level of humility or help, or just, there's that Jordan part we were talking about where it's like, well, here's the opportunity. I'm just going to do whatever I can. I mean, so it's certainly not luck, given the way you've told that story. So you do this, and now maybe you get a job, you keep moving forward, and even with the job, it's no guarantee that you're going to work, right? It just means you have employment if there's employment to be had. So when you look back on all the things you've done from that facet of your career, where is the film or the one film that you've worked on in particular where you're like, this is where I came into my own. This is where I sort of, when I watch this, it makes me not the best or the proudest, but it's a moment in your mind where you're like, I remember that because that's where I kind of knew I was going to be okay.
That's a really good question. I think it must have been Tenet was a big one.
That's huge.
That was
it's so weird audio. The sound is not, like I said, it's not like, oh, cue the kiss. It's like, no, it's like, what? I don't even know what half those sounds are. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it was a crazy experience because the engineer for The Simpsons had sort of mentored me and introduced me to people, and I'd assist other engineers, and I always had help or someone to call when I didn't know what to do. Weird issue in Pro Tools, I don't know what to do, or I don't know what they need at the dub stage. And there was always a safety net for me. Whereas on Tenet, it was everyone I knew was busy. I'd been doing this for a couple of years, so long enough to where they're like, you should know. And it was just, I was able to assist an engineer that I'd admired and that I'd worked for before, but again, that safety net was always there. And that was the first time I think he'd really expected me to be on my A game and to be able to sort of handle everything for him to keep him fresh so he can just mix. Because on a Nolan project, it's like if something needs to happen, there's no, I'm kind of having this issue, or let me look up how to do this and we'll get it to you tomorrow. It's, I need this and I need it yesterday. So that was the one I felt like at the end of it, I was like, oh, I know how to do this. And worst comes to worst, I just can keep doing this and be happy.
Did the expectation you set in your mind before you went to Tenet, knowing it was a Nolan project, did the project parameters exceed your expectation? Meaning, was it harder, or was it exactly what you thought it would be from a level of sort of competency and difficulty?
It was pretty close to what I thought it would be. And I knew it would be around the clock. I knew it would be random calls of, hey, get here now. And I was still, working at Hans' studio at the time. And so I was going from Santa Monica to Burbank, which is not fun.
Wow.
And it was pretty close, if not slightly easier, just because I had so much doubt in myself and so much imposter syndrome of like, when are they going to realize that I'm barely hanging on here?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that brings up a great point. So just like we have all these other moments and different musicians have different answers, although I'll give you the spoiler alert. It's always a variation of the same answer. Imposter syndrome is real, and anyone involved in any sort of creative field, especially once you move to the professional level, has it on any level. Do you still have it? Is it still creep in, or are you through it?
It's always there. Small things to big things of, being asked to do this. It's okay. He doesn't know that I'm a phony. And it's, all the time I get mom's friend's son wants to be in music, wants to call me and ask, how do you do it? Where do you go? And I'm sort of like, I haven't done it. I have no idea. I'm I'm figuring this out too. Those sort of small things that wake you up, or if someone says, congrats on that project, I'm like, well, I didn't really do anything. And it
Mm,
just immediately goes to, well, I was useless. I didn't do anything. You just forget the work you've done, and you know, when things become second nature, you forget what you know.
sure.
Um,
And I think part of that, to your credit too, is you are obviously still a fan of what you do. And a lot of people don't understand that in your line of work. Obviously, one day, sure, you've done something, but who knows who you'll work with next, and you may be a fan of that person. And I think anytime you meet someone you're a fan of, or you're involved in something you're fanatic about, you never feel like you deserve to be there, because part of it is I can't. How did this happen to me? Like, you remember, you go back to all of the things that you probably thought were going to be the train wreck that derailed your career in music, or that were not going to add up, and you're like, this is so weird that I'm even here with this opportunity. Is my best good enough? So I think it's great for our listeners to hear that. And again, when different artists talk about it, it's all the same. It's a different version of the story of the same. Everybody has it. It's a real part of being involved in the creative field, is always worrying whether or not you're good enough. And I think it's great to hear a lot of what you're talking about too. Seems like the relationships you made along the way, which is something we hear a lot too. The people you meet, that community is just as important to your success as the work you do. Am I correct there in your case?
100%. The community is the reason I was able to get any projects at all.
Mm,
It was really, someone seeing that I want to help out and vouching for me and saying, let's give this person a shot. To an engineer not having an assistant. What started for me was I was told, okay, we're going to hire you as an engineer at remote control. You're going to clean cables and do this stuff everyone doesn't have time to do. Um, you know, you'll get to setting up sessions. Don't worry about Alan Meyerson. That's years down the road. And Alan Meyerson is, for those who don't know who he is an absolutely incredible engineer who's mixed a lot of my favorite scores.
mm.
And I think my second day there, I got a call from the front desk. Alan Meyerson wants to see you. And I was terrified. I've told him this since then. And I walked into the room and he turns around and he goes, "Hey, my assistant is gone for the week and I'm starting a film. Guess who's getting thrown into the fire?"
Wow.
And it was just this, okay, like, this is going to be a bummer for you, man.
That's awesome. You know what else is awesome? Out of that entire amazing story you just told that I want to hear a little bit more of, I literally could hear people saying what I'm about to say to you out loud while you were saying it. You clean cables? I can hear people come, that realization dawning on me. And it's so, yeah, that was the minute you said it, I was like, there's a whole, like, I'm supposed to clean those things? That's insanity. But so you have this dream scenario now, or a nightmare scenario in the moment. I'm sure you're like, oh, again,
Yeah.
you're like, it's like, okay, trial by fire. So do you remember the score that you were working on, or the film it was for?
Yes, it was Jeff Sinelli's score for a movie called The Intruder.
Oh,
Um, and that, that came out like a year and a half or 2 years after I'd worked on it or something like that. And so it was, in the back of my mind, of course, no one's thinking this, but I'm like, is it not coming out because I made it sound bad?
that's awesome. But you personalize it, right? It's like, okay, you personalize it. And that also brings to mind a question that I've often wondered. When a producer or a composer puts a piece of work together, and you've worked, I'm sure, on many different movies from different and similar composers, do they, in their mind, they come to the engineers, do they come together and be like, this is how I'm hearing it? Or do they leave it up to the engineer and the director? I mean, did the composers really have a lot of control over how their work ends up being presented once it hits the mixing stage?
It definitely depends on the composer and depends on the director. Usually a higher level composer will have quite a bit of say.
Hmm.
And a lower level director won't have as much say because the studios get involved and it's basically a movie for the studios. But as far as coming to an engineer, there's usually quite a bit of meetings before then. But on smaller projects, unfortunately, sometimes they don't tell you what they want until you send them the mixes. And they go, well, I was thinking of it more in this approach. And you're like, that's completely not how I was seeing it. So let me just do that. Which can be, it can be tough because now you're in a service to something and it's no longer your mix, or for a composer, it's no longer your score. It's let's make the director happy.
Well, so like, as you know, and I'm sure you've experienced on the music. So let's just go to I'm making a record, I'm an artist end. So on that end, there are a lot of analogous records. Like, so they'll say, I want it to sound like Steely Dan's Asia. I want it to sound like Thriller, right? So there'll be these standards that sort of exist. Are there standards in the film scoring industry where, like, I want it to sound like the score I want it to sound like John Williams, or I want it to sound like Alex Silvestri? Is there any sort of kind of weird thing that we innocuously judge everything by when we're putting music together for movies?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's more like I want it to be like that score. And everyone, a big one people go to is like, it needs to sound like Inception. And you're like, okay, well, you didn't write a score like Inception. So it's sometimes it does not, the work does not match the description.
Sure.
But a lot of the time it's within reason and you can kind of tell okay, this is more similar to a John Williams score. It's a beautiful orchestral arrangement. And that's kind of, it's more of something I'd set for myself as far as less someone telling me something and more of me just sort of seeing that and going, okay, this girl that belts her heart out over a piano, let me reference an Adele track and see what's going on. Okay. So it's more within myself than someone coming to me and saying, let's make it sound like this.
And again, to your point, every project is in director and producer and studio. It's all different. But in your experience, do you end up seeing during the mixing, not when it's done, but during the process of mixing or editing, do you end up seeing the director a lot, or does the director just kind of stay back until it's done on your end and then you present it to him and then he'll maybe have notes or revisions, or do some directors come in the room while you guys are doing stuff and be like, no more of this or no more of that?
Typically, in my experience, it's been, I'll see the director at the scoring stage, and the dub stage, and that's really it. They don't always come to the score mix. But I've, since working for various engineers and everything, have gone on to work directly with Trent and Atticus.
I was going to bring that up, so that's on you now. You brought it up. You just opened that Pandora's box of questions. Continue.
But that's been, directors will come in for playbacks because now it's working with composers instead of engineers, and seeing, hey, where's everything at? And sometimes it's, sending cues from a distance, and then I'm in town because it's Los Angeles. Let me stop by and hear everything in the studio and catch up. So it's become more common as of lately.
So before we go down any other rabbit holes, you had mentioned scoring stages. Do you have a personal favorite scoring stage that you've worked at or on, or one that really just every time you're there, it's kind of like butter getting sound out of? I'm sure they're all amazing, but is there any one more amazing than next?
They're all wildly different. Trying to think of one that sticks
out. Is there one
out.
you frequent more than others? Is there one where you generally find a lot of work is being done as compared to the others?
It surprisingly sort of seems to take turns.
Really?
Yeah, it feels like it's constantly switching, but a place that I've been to quite a bit is the Village. So that's always sort of, it has a nice home vibe as opposed to big corporate lot. If that makes sense.
So then do you also have a session that you've been a part of where you've walked in and maybe you were on the prepping side or the engineering side and you've looked at what you have to set up for and you're like, dear Lord God in heaven, how am I going to get this whole thing go? Even if it's just assigning things to faders from a master tape, is there like, oh, here's 56 tracks, do something with this, where you're just kind of staring at it going, what is about to happen here?
Well, typically, short answer, yes. I was typically working, so the engineer would go offsite to Warner Brothers or Fox or wherever. They'd have a team there that would handle the setup for the scoring session, thank God. And I would be the one taking the files, taking the recordings, and bringing them back to the mix room. Because a lot of the time it was, hey, we have a triple session today. It's going to get done at 9 p.m. I need to start mixing tomorrow at 7 a.m. And so by the time the session ends and they come in to start, I've got to get that ready. And so there was definitely many a time of it's 11 p.m. and I'm looking at a hard drive with 20 passes of orchestra going, how am I going to prep this? I've got to, like, where do I start? It's that sort of paralyzed. I guess I'll get some layouts on the S6 and bring in the passes, start making VCAs. Where do I even begin? And I started to get the flow of it, but there were definitely quite a bit of times of how is this going to happen?
Now, are you afforded the luxury, you bring up the kind of that prep work, are you afforded the luxury of creating your own template in Pro Tools to organize these things? Or are you working within someone else's established template and you've got to sort of slot things into the way they have it set up?
It's typically that, yeah. And I build a template from scratch each time, but I do it the way they like to work.
Okay. So they give you sort of the details, the notes, that sort of, what they look for, that kind of thing. And then that's kind of actually impressive. It's a fresh session every time. It's not like a standard template where you just add or remove things. You got to kind of start and bake it from scratch, huh?
Yeah. Because it'll be, hey, for this one, I'm thinking of doing X, Y, Z. And, I've been lucky enough, but it makes it more difficult that the engineers I've worked for have liked to experiment and say, I want to try this new thing. And it's been different for every single project.
Do you recall the largest track count you've ever had to deal with in a session of that sort of momentum?
Largest track count? I'm not sure track count. I know on Lion King, we had to use 3 or 4 computers all linked via satellite. That got intense.
I was going to say, no room for error there. No, what could possibly go wrong? Holy cow. And then I'm presuming, and I shouldn't because things are so different now, but is a majority of the work you do in the boxes, are you guys all still using Pro Tools, or do you find that it's kind of switching up between Logic, Pro Tools, Performer? Do you have to kind of sort of know all the DAWs, or are you just really kind of still in the PT world?
It's definitely good to know all the DAWs, but a mix typically stays in Pro Tools. But sometimes it's like I'll get sent. I would get sent Logic sessions, and it's Composer doesn't have an assistant. Can you export all this and bring it into Pro Tools? And so it's good to know how it all works. And then the biggest thing was when COVID hit, players now have to record from home, and they're calling me going, my Logic session keeps crashing. Do you know why? And I guess we'll figure it out.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and that ultimately, I'm not going to let you off. I know everyone's waiting for me to get back to what you talked about before, and I'm painfully dragging it out because I'm that guy and I just don't care. I'm interested in this other stuff. Right
I love it.
But that brings up another point that I wanted to ask. So during COVID, obviously, that industry shuts down to some extent because there are so many things that can't be done, like the live component of it. How much did it affect your world on the back end of it with scoring and composing, since those things really in this day and age are set up to be done to some extent via satellite?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to where it didn't affect me too much. Pandemic aside and illness and death,
Sure.
I needed a few weeks off. So I was burnt out and kind of just took a few weeks. And then as I was going, okay, it looks like it's going to be longer than 2 weeks. It was quickly, a lot of ambitious people around me going, we got to figure out how to make this work right now. And that was actually when we started Tenet. And I was like, how are we going to do this? Just no orchestra? Or, oh no, we're going to figure out how they can record themselves from home with our help. Okay.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
It was, and it was in a phase when you forget how scary it was at first, where it's, I'm talking to an engineer I'm going to be working with 20 feet apart outside. And I'm sitting there going, do I need to change my clothes and shower? And what do I do?
Yeah.
And it was, I was really grateful to just have a team of people that were ambitious enough to try and pull this off and were willing to put in the footwork to make it happen.
Wow. Has post-COVID, has that changed the way that you work now? Meaning, do you find yourself now post-COVID working from your own studio more than you used to? Or do you still end up going and basically being on site when you need to be for most of it?
It's still been on site, but there's definitely now a sort of thing that happens where it's, if you need a quick overdub, that player can just record themselves from home. It's kind of thought that a lot of these players have a home setup of some sort and can get by on doing it because they've done it before. So it definitely happens more now than it ever did of, let's have that violin player record themselves from home and send it to us.
And that's, again, its own world of, oh boy, what do we got? It's the magical mystery tour. What's going to come in today? And again, it's not because of anyone not wanting to do their best, but to your point, there's a difference between the way a group of people that have been trained to record things professionally in an environment with speed and tact in mind. There's a way they do things, and then there's the way someone that's got unlimited time, too much access to YouTube, and poor advice from the Guitar Center sales associate down the street. There's the way they do things. So
exactly.
As you try and piece those things together in this modern age, do you find that a lot of your time is, not a lot, but do you find more of your time is spent trying to make the best out of what you get, or do you have people redo things with a little advice? What do you get a bad file in? What's your go-to? Do you try and fix it, or do you try and put the onus on the person that did it and kind of cheer them on and be like, if we tried it this way, maybe it would be different?
It's definitely work with what you have.
Okay.
And there's certain tools that are helpful if you get something in with noise on it or whatever, but it's, there was definitely manuals that went out to musicians of, here's the best way to record your instrument.
Wow.
Here's the level you should be looking at. And, I was using TeamViewer to log into their computer and check their levels. And
jeez.
There's things like if someone had an Apollo, I can use their software and change their gain for them. So they're having to think less and do less, and even operate Pro Tools for people just logging into their computer.
Wow. That's pretty awesome. And
so
then again,
I'll catch it before it happens. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say all to the end of, then you don't have that problem. A little prep up front probably saves you a ton of time, energy, and effort on the back end. So to you, it's definitely worth it, I would think.
Definitely. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I've been a jerk long enough. We'll go back to two names that you conveniently placed in the middle of the conversation. So, and I'm going to tell everyone, I'm going to look at the camera when I say this. This isn't a podcast about Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. So I don't care how angry you get or what nonsense you melee in the comments, have at it. This is a podcast about my friend Jacob, who happens to do some work with and for those gentlemen. And our conversation will be about him and not them. So keep it to yourself. Okay. And it's like you've probably... No two names when it comes to, especially with composition, like movie composition, no two names get as much attention as those two gentlemen, simply because, and that going in, right? So I'm sure at some particular point in time, in normal conversations, you have to be thinking it's a liability to even bring up the fact that you have done any work with those gentlemen whatsoever, because you know that's oh my, and it's like you're working with Elvis and Elvis's brother at the same time. So talk really briefly, how do you meet either one or both of them? How does it go from I'm working on these movies, okay, and I have to admit at this point in time, I don't think most people could be any more angry at you for accidentally falling into Hans Zimmer studio than working on some Christopher Nolan films.
Yeah.
And now we're going to bring these guys up. So it's like, well, insult, here's injury and salt in the wound. Here we go. Jacob, tell us about how hard it is to be you on the West Coast today.
Well, as great as it sounds, it was difficult for a while. And, I was saying yes to everything. Feeling like if I said no to a project, I would never get a call again. Trying to do as much as I could, being younger, it's been, how do I get experience so that, I don't want to say I've only been working for 3 years or whatever, and then not know what I'm doing. I want to get as much experience as quickly as possible. But I started to burn out and started to feel like, maybe I don't want to mix films. Maybe that's not where my passion is. I want to see scores get created from the second the first note of music is written. How do I do that? And maybe I want to work more on records, but how do people do that now? It's rare to see bands get a budget where they book out a big studio for 6 months and spend the first week getting drum tones, and it doesn't really happen anymore. So figuring out where I want to go and what I want to do, I decided I was going to take a month off. I said no to everything, which was very difficult, and just said, I need to collect myself and figure out where I want to go and what I want to do. I think I was like, I'd been at remote for a few years and was starting to think, where do I go from here? Luckily, 2 or 3 weeks into that month off, I got a call from a friend of mine who said, hey, Trent and Atticus are looking for an engineer. Would you want to step in and do that? And I was like, why is this even a question? Yes. And next thing I know, I was getting to sit with them and tell them how I can help. And, I'm sitting there going, what do I have to offer? There's no way this is going to happen. When I got the job, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my friends.
You didn't want to jinx it.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to have to call them in a month and say, well, I was fired. And so it was, again, a thing of luck or fate or whatever it is, right situation, right time, right place. But that's how it really started.
I'm going to go out on a limb and duck, because here comes some love. Given the track record of the people that you've worked with, I'm going to go a lot less with the luck category and a lot more of, it sounds like clearly you've put the energy and the effort in to be the best version of what you want to do. And I think other people recognize that. So now it won't be as awkward. I won't do any more of that until the end. But I have to ask, obviously, so you're coming from this environment where you're working with different composers, different styles of music, big, huge sessions that, ultimately end up in a place. It's not like they end up they do, but you see it and you hear it at the same time, and that creates the experience. So there's something to be said for that particular component of what you've done. Now you're moving to something where ultimately maybe you'll see some of it, but you'll definitely hear all of it. Like you said, how does this even work anymore? Did you find that all of the work you had been doing in film and scoring really translated to working the way they worked, or being able to facilitate their creative needs? Or did you have other things you kind of had to learn along the way there?
There was definitely various learning curves just with the way they work. But I think having a background in film led me to be able to figure it out in that environment. Because there's things that are different in working on a film score than working on a record, where it's things like, what do you do when you get a new cut of picture coming in and the director's taken out 3 frames every 5 seconds, and now your hit points don't line up, and you know, even dealing with time code and things like that. It was knowing how to label a file, so that when you send it to whoever needs it, they know exactly what cue it is, and just tracking a film altogether. That was extremely useful, and that's kind of, I think, why I was able to stick around at first.
Well, and I was going to ask, so I'm sorry if I didn't ask this before, but I was just out of curiosity. I know there's no hard set number, but on a major motion picture, when you're working on a film score, how many people are, on average, would you guess or say, are involved with the sound department in general for a film? You're one of how many people working on the sound components of a movie at any time?
Well, for a score, that can vary based on teams.
Sure.
As of now, it's like 3 or 4 or 5 people.
Okay.
Whereas if you start including, re-recording mixers and all the assistants and the techs at the dub stage versus techs in the studio, I don't know what it's called, but the guy that holds the boom pole on set, that can be quite a bit. There's, I think, a project I'm doing right now. The credits are like 10 minutes long or something like that, because it's a lot of people come together, and there's a certain aspect of, okay, a lot of people are putting in their work, and I don't want to let them down. But part of what the advice I got when I first started was, there's a lot of people here that know what they're doing. You're not going to fall on your own and ruin everything.
That's pretty awesome. That's actually really good advice. That had to make you feel better, right?
Yeah, I might slow things down and really extend the budget, because now we need a few extra days.
Sure.
But as far as, something coming out terrible strictly because of me, it's probably not going to happen. You'd have to really screw something up for no one down the line to be able to help out.
Wow. So you come from this scenario in your life where you're a part of this thing that's much bigger than you. And even if you aren't directly exposed to everyone working in the different facets, you're aware of it. And you're like, this is, like you said, this is a huge family of people making this product. And then you shuffle that down to, now here's 2 people directly, and only 2 people that I'm working with. And so was that a weird transition to go from this sort of big community to like, oh, it begins and ends with these 2 humans?
That was very strange. It was we spent a lot of time in the studio. And so it's the circle of people you interact with, going from, 20 people on a big campus at a big studio to 2 or, however many are in that day. That was a big learning curve too. And really having no one to turn to, no one to throw under the bus.
Right.
But it wasn't, there were really nice things about it, where, streamlines communication. It's easy to get everyone in a room and say, here's what we're going to do. Here's where we're going to go. Whereas when you have so many people, and if you're working with the team in London or wherever it is, there's so much back and forth, so much, that person didn't copy me on that email, or whatever it might be.
Sure. Yeah. So this transition, going back to, you originally took the time off, right? Because you were burned out. Is this what you needed? Was this that happy accident, or how did you manage the decision-making process of, I'm going to kind of go in this direction now and maybe do some of this, but not as much? Or how do you balance this out now that you've got this other opportunity?
It was 100% what I needed.
Okay.
And I had a sort of sense of myself by this time, to where I wasn't still trying to say yes to everyone outside the job and do a bunch of things outside the studio. I had to be at my best at all times.
Sure.
Just to, make sure I'm not phoning anything in or half-assing anything. But it was also me deciding, do I want to work on records? Do I want to work on film scores? And the things that were sort of tiring me out about film scores didn't really apply anymore. Where it's no longer I don't get to see the music get made. I see it when it's written and ready to be recorded.
Sure.
Whereas now I got to see from the first note of something happening to the final product, which was exciting and humbling. And yeah, it was exactly the reset I was looking for.
So in working with Trent and Atticus, do you find that there's this would be, I think, the number one question without going too deep. Everyone looks at these guys as sort of like mad geniuses. And if you have any sort of recording interest, you picture two guys walking into just a room and just erupting into creativity and trying weird things and experimenting and like, let's use this. Is it as experimental in a lot of ways, since you're the one that has to record everything as the engineer? Do you find yourself kind of doing a lot of the old school meat and potatoes, like, nope, you can set the pre's, get the mics up, and then they're just going to do their thing? Or do you find that, today we're going to take a violin bow and we're going to put two piezo mics on that and throw it out a window into a flaming oil drum and then kick that into the river, and I hope it sounds good?
Definitely that. There was, I think just about everyone I've gotten to work with, it's been, okay, what's going to happen? Like in a session that I knew Hans might walk into, I made sure there were spare lines, and because there's going to be some crazy, what if we run a mic down the hall and stick it in the bathroom and leave all the doors open and have them play really loud? What would that sound like? And it's, okay. I have that ready, I guess. And,
wow.
It's be ready in 5 and know what you're doing. And a lot of it's get out of your own head.
Sure.
Because it's easy to start going, where do I start? Yeah.
Well, and to that, though, that statement you made about get out of your own head, I find that so far, you've already probably dissected this, a lot of the musical decisions you've made from a career standpoint, whether it's just film or whether it's working with other composers, sort of resolves you to checking your personal musical identity and preferences at the door, because you're, like you said earlier, you're kind of there to serve whatever needs to be served. Do you find as a creative person yourself that this sort of, does this fuel anything in you to have to try and do something or work on any type of music or project that is yours and only yours, or is more what you might call your identity as an artist or a creative person? Or are you just content in the moment serving, the fields you're in?
I definitely need to be able to do my own thing as well. Not necessarily, completing projects and pushing them out, but just experiment with things on my own. I'll see whoever I've worked with do something that inspires something in me, and I go, I want to try something like that, but do it like this. And I'm able to pull things from different people, and, collaborate with different musicians I've gotten to work with. As far as, a talented percussionist comes in, she needs me to mix something, and I go, well, can you play something for me then? And we can just trade. And,
wow.
So I'm always trying to have fun and sort of scratch that creative itch as well.
But it also seems like the work you do is very satisfying. It seems like, obviously, at the end of the day, you wouldn't keep doing it if you weren't enjoying it and you weren't enjoying the result of it, I would presume. I would think you'd go nuts if you hated what you did and you had to put yourself in this kind of pressure. I would think you would just explode. So with that in mind, I want to ask you some very basic gear questions about you. Forget what the scenario is. So whether it's Atticus and Trent or anyone else you work with, or whether it's a film session, if you could only go to any of those projects with 2 microphones, one dynamic and one condenser, what would they be? I know. Just one. They have to serve any of those scenarios, one of each. What would they be? There's no right or wrong answers, of course.
Yeah. I want to get clever, but I'll give you the real answer.
Yeah.
Condenser would be, it's going to be a bummer answer, vintage 414.
That's not a bummer. That's awesome. How old, though, when you say vintage 414? What vintage?
I love the EB series, and
Okay.
well, I think being able to switch polar patterns and everything like that is extremely helpful if you can only have that mic as your condenser.
Wow.
Um, I'd be happy recording vocals on it or a snare on it, but I think for dynamic,
Mm-hmm. Wait for it. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I might just have to go with the 57. Why
I
not?
knew it. I knew you. Well, then that's the bigger answer to that question is why not? What do you have to lose with the 57? I'm not saying that it should be the mic that rules all other mics. I'm just saying very few microphones ever get discussed to the level that the 57 can get discussed. Like we said earlier, like if you're going to tape it to something and throw it out a window, guess what? It's going to not only record it, it's still going to work when you pull it back in. So I could see it being and if something does go wrong, they're easy to repair. Parts are readily available. I mean, it's earned its reputation. I know that people think it's cliche, but I laugh to your point when you're like, I'm trying to be clever. It's like, he doesn't want to say 57. That's what he's looking for, another dynamic mic. I knew immediately you had the condenser mic. I'm like, he already knows what condenser mic it's going to be, but he's trying not to say Shure SM57 because it's going to make it sound, but why not? So now you only get one preamp, or dealer's choice. You can mix one preamp you can use or any desk. Whether it's an SSL, any desk, whichever one you want.
I love the SSL duality.
You do? Wow.
It's
Are there a lot of those in your field, in the composition field? Do you see a lot of that desk these days? It seems like it would be ideal for the home and like to cross over and.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And it's extremely straightforward. You can, if you know engineering, I think you can look at any SSL desk and figure it out. There's not weird hieroglyphics and everything like that. I think the board trees are great. And yeah, I love SSL.
Well, and at the level you've been working, whether it's with composers or working on other composers' scores, do you find that there's a certain threshold of gear maintenance and gear sort of, I don't want to say cleanliness because we're, but a lot of studios, like in the rock and roll world, the control room's not getting cleaned anytime soon by anyone. The preamps aren't going to get, until it breaks or needs to be fixed, it's not going to happen. And that's the mojo, right? For the record, in this particular field where everything is, 11.1, immersive sound, huge. Do you find that there's a level of maintenance that is maintained or needs to be maintained in order to make things, easier on the recording process?
Definitely. I think the biggest thing in working in a professional environment versus when I was in school doing sessions with friends or whatever it was, I still took it seriously and didn't want anything to mess up, but there wasn't a budget on the line. There wasn't precious time being wasted where we're not going to meet a deadline. So the goal is to keep it maintained so that you never find a problem with it. If it's, if you have 500 series racks, let's take it out and dust it every once in a while before we start noticing little crackles and, dips in signal. Let's dust the console and exercise the pots. And, to be honest, I thought that was me being hazed when I started at studios. It was turn all the knobs. And I was like, okay, but it's, it's important.
I love in my mind, I create those scenarios where there's a weird fraternity of engineers that try and, the new kid comes in, he's like, look, this is where the impedance is. Find the outpedance button for me. It's like, it's like, hey, where are the left-handed drumsticks? We're down. It's like, but no, that can't be it. But so as we wind down, your career is ridiculous and you're just getting started, which is what I love. But there's two things on the horizon that are actually both here that are going to affect, I think, both aspects of your career. One is immersive audio, which I'm sure you already have some experience with, given what you've worked on. I want to get your thoughts on that. But the second, which of course at this time in 2024 is the hot button topic of AI generated music. And so, but first things first, immersive audio. Where are you at personally with it? How do you, outside of the film, obviously for movies it makes perfect sense. When you think of immersive audio for just casual listening, what are your thoughts? I'm curious.
It's interesting, and it's a conversation where I always feel like I'm walking on eggshells when I talk about it, because
We all
it's
do. Yeah.
no
We all
matter
do.
what, no matter what, we're gonna offend someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's I if it can get people to make listening to music the activity instead of what's happening in the background, I think that's incredible. Um,
Preach. Yeah.
because
That's a good
it's
point.
been I've had friends come into a studio wherever that know nothing about music besides they like it, and I'll play a song for them, a song they know, and they'll listen to it and just be in shock. And is this a different? I've never heard these elements before, and it's, oh, you've never sat down and listened on really good speakers or a nice pair of headphones and just sat and listened.
Right. That is the event. Just listening to the music is the event. That's what you're
Yeah,
doing. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like I think that's great if that can happen, but I do think we should admit that we're all still kind of in the wild, wild west with it, and that
Sure.
it's not completely transferable, and that not everything needs to be all around me, in my opinion.
Sure.
I found the best results that I truly appreciate happen when you go into it knowing it's going to be immersive or Atmos or whatever it is. What gets tricky is when you work on a stereo mix and then find out, okay, the spatial audio version is going to come out next week. And you're like, wait, what? We spent months on this stereo mix and it's just going to be up mixed in the course of 2 days.
Wow.
I think that's where it starts to get tricky.
Do you find the process when you're working on something from going to stereo to immersive, does it require a reset for you? Like, do you have to take an hour in between or 2 hours in between? How do your ears accommodate for that if you're working on something that might be in both worlds? Do you give yourself a break, or do you just kind of back and forth, like you're switching between A and B, two sets of monitors?
I think back and forth pretty much.
Wow.
But it's easier, it's easier to start up and go down as opposed to down and go up. So I find, starting with 2 speakers and saying, okay, let's get this all around us. That's tough for me. And it's, what do I want behind me? We didn't go into it thinking this. Whereas if you go into it knowing this is going to be mixed in surround, you sort of know, okay, I want these elements. What do I want to separate in the stems so that if someone's going to do a full Atmos mix, they have control over? What do I want to tie their hands with?
Right.
And yeah, but I think it's a learning curve for a lot of people. I think it's exciting and it can do great things, but sometimes it can be like a kid with a hammer, where not everything needs to fly around my head, and
sure,
not everything needs to be behind me.
Do you think maybe you'll be the first person to mix the Wilhelm scream in immersive sound? Do we think that's a designation? I mean, someone's going to have that designation, and in my opinion, it should be you at this point in time. So you might just want to squeeze that in somewhere, whether they know it or not, and see what happens.
I can try. I think it'll be, I've gotten to hear it in a lot of movies on the stage.
Yeah.
Where it's,
of course,
I won't hear it. And then, it's definitely been in surround environments, because I'll not hear it, watch a movie a million times, and then I'll be sitting in the back left corner, letting other people watch it. And I'll go, oh, there it is.
Have you ever, no one's ever come in and said to you, listen, I'm putting this scream in, you need to hide it somewhere in one of these other mixes or fields, or, it's a rule. I think every movie has to have it by law, at least if you want to be taken seriously.
I haven't had someone come to me and say that, but I've definitely seen re-recording mixers say, I'm going to put this in somewhere.
That's amazing. It makes my life. It just made my day. Mwah. Nothing accidental about it. It's purposefully malicious at this point in time. So we'll finish with this, just because, again, like 11.1, this is that crazy, gets everyone all up in arms, kind of like a Spotify. Any conversation about modern music technology, and it's like politics for musicians. It's like you're split down the middle. There's extremes. It's insane. But as of late, at the taping of this podcast, we've sort of been inundated with the first wave of AI music generators. And I'm not going to get on a soapbox and make any weird, it's not good enough. The point is it's here. It's not going away. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It's here. As you see the applications for some of these programs being sort of rolled out in their infancy, we're at this weird turning point in our industry where it's like, okay, here's a program that ultimately says you can type some words in, and things that composers in particular get paid fairly well to do and take a long time to do and put their blood. This thing is said to be able to spit these out in milliseconds. And I know that that particular segment of our industry right now is kind of paying attention. How do you feel? And again, this isn't, I'm not looking for you. It's bad. It's just, are you hearing it? I mean, are we seeing it more just from a few people whining about it online, or is it a real concern or a real topic that people are talking about? Because you're in the actual real industry that it would affect. So I'm interested to just hear your thoughts at this stage.
I think it's a real concern. There's pros and cons to everything. But I don't really look at where we are right now with it, but right this second, as a major concern, selfishly for me, because that's
sure. But of course,
I think it's going to get better fast. I remember 2 years ago, someone was showing me, hey, I can type in this prompt and a picture comes up of what I typed in, made by AI. Every time I hit prompt, it's different, even if it's the same description. It looks terrible, but how cool is this?
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, it was, here's this very realistic thing. And now it's, I can watch a video of something and I don't know how any of that works. And I'm not good with Photoshop or anything clever like that. So did that actually happen? Did he say that? Because I'm seeing a video of him saying that.
Right.
So I think it's only a matter of time to where music can be done by AI. I think a lot of jobs will be able to be done by AI.
Sure.
And it's, I try not to get anxious about it. Because I'm sort of left to just thinking, so where do we go once no one can work? What does money become? What do we do?
You're getting existential with it.
Yeah.
So, and but that's the nature of, like you said, if you pursue it to its logical conclusion, these are the things that ultimately stem from it, which is why no one can stay focused on the music conversation, because you're like, well, music is just the beginning. I mean, what else will it do? And my thought, which is something I don't hear a lot, is I think to your point, we act as if it just showed up 2 weeks ago, and it's been a part of so many of the systems we use in our industry for years and years and years in different permutations and in different paths. And I remember when ADATs showed up, right? That's how old I am. I remember when drum machines showed up. I mean, I was young, but you go back in history, and that very first Steely Dan record to use the Wendell Jr., which was this revolutionary, the Wendell Jr. actually got a platinum record from RIA. They actually gave the drum sequencer a platinum record. And I can imagine being a session player in LA at the time thinking, holy cow, my job in my life is over. And it wasn't even close to that. I mean, no great musician or player has ever lost to some sort of technology or instrument when time isn't an issue. It's one thing if you have 2 hours to turn something around. And I think that's ultimately to your point from when we were talking earlier, like with revisions. And I think there's going to be some useful tools that come from this that can actually help in situations like that. But no one who's ever been super talented has been unemployed by something that just does what you tell it to do in the history of mankind. So I think there should be a hope. I mean, again, the tool will be abused, of course, and people will, we don't even have to guess where this is going to go. However, I don't necessarily think for all of us that care about this, like you said, I mean, music is either something you love or you don't. And that's the people that love it end up gravitating towards it to make it and help it be made for other people that love it. And I think that community is strong. I think it's always going to be here. And I think we all have the same concerns, and who knows where it ends up. And it's easy for me to say on the software side of things, because we see things maybe in this light a little differently, and we've seen them way longer. this isn't new to us. We're like, oh, you guys are just figuring out that robots are smart and the Terminator's real and Cameron is a prophet and this is what's going to, and we're like, we knew all this 10 years ago. We're all just kind of like, oh, that's right, it's here. Holy cow. Everyone else just found out about it. It's like, remember when the government had told us there were aliens a few years back and we just sort of all were like, we knew that. And they were like, oh, we forgot to tell you guys? Yeah, there's aliens.
No one cared.
That's how we are with AI. We're like, oh, you guys just figuring out that's real? Oh, yeah. Cameron knew what he was talking about. You're all doomed. We're going to be fine, though.
Yeah. Well, and you've probably experienced it with samples of, you're taking musicians' jobs, and when people didn't really understand how that.
Of course we are. We have all their jobs in my bottom desk drawer.
That's the goal, yeah. That's the goal.
Yes, another job off the streets. Yes, and I put it in my bottom drawer and I sip Cardi and wonderful. Yeah, that's what we do.
Exactly. Here. Yeah.
So think about this one. So we know what you're doing. So you came up one way, you took the break. Now you've got these two worlds, and incidentally, the two composers you're working with still have a lot to do with the sound for film world. So it's kind of like you have this perfect marriage. I'm going to ask you two questions. What do you think is next for you? And if you could chart it out and you could just snap your fingers, what would be next for you?
I like how you separate the two. That's a good way to do it.
Two very different things. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what I'm looking at is how can I get more creative with my work, and how can I carve a path for myself. And it's been getting into score production instead of just engineering. Working on bringing ideas to life or covering certain scenes, and the hope is that takes me on my own path to being able to compose for film and produce records for people. Wow. That's really been the goal as of lately.
That's awesome. Do you see so are the two worlds, do you think that's what will happen, and that's clearly what you want to happen? You think I'm going to tell you, man, your track record's pretty stellar so far. You don't seem like a guy that puts his mind to something and doesn't get there. I'm just saying so we should just be looking for you to be the main event, which is kind of exciting for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, with enough patience and work ethic, the two can merge. And I would throw in the lottery, and I think I'd be happy.
Well, you and me both. So anyone that's paid attention to this interview can extrapolate just years and years of wisdom from everything you've had to share. But if you were going to take all of the things that you've learned, and this is the point in time in a podcast that say this for, like, people always say, I hope they don't do anything corny or say anything stupid, but it's the corny, stupid stuff that ultimately sort of like sticks. And this is one of those weird, like, parental, corny, stupid things. So just let a player be. So my question is, if you were going to distill one piece of advice, I mean, it is this dumbest, even as I say it, I want to punch myself in the face because it's such a dumb question to ask, but there has to be something other than the obvious that you would impart to a younger version of you. It's not like a stay in school study. It's like, what's the one thing that has remained true that you had to find out on your own the hard way that could have saved you countless minutes of heartache, countless, whatever, that you could tell someone young, like with a straight face, and be like, listen, if you forget everything else they tell you, this one thing will help keep you healthy and happy as you go down this journey, no matter what happens. What is that piece of advice?
That's a tough one.
It's not supposed to be easy. If it were easy, it wouldn't be good advice.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's really been, don't worry too much about yourself right now. That's what I wish I could go back and tell my 21-year-old self of, don't worry about everything needing to go the way you expect it to go. Things will change. Other opportunities will come up outside of what you think. It's not all going to crumble if one thing doesn't go according to plan. Stay focused and just, be smart about it and have some sort of a strategy or set goals for yourself. But just know that it doesn't need to completely go that way. I'm not at all where I thought I would be 7 years ago. It went completely different. But I'm happy with it, and it's worked out. And it's been okay.
I'd say you're doing all right. You'd say it had a happy middle because it's far from the ending. Last question, and then I promise you can go back to your life. At any point in time when you were first starting out as a 20-year-old, getting turned down by all the major studios, did you consider getting a fake ID and lying about your age to get the job at the studio?
I did. And I may or may not have allegedly had a fake ID.
I've heard nothing of it.
Thought, can I never drank with it. I just had it as a prop for movies and such. And I was thinking, could I just go somewhere and turn this in? And then, I realized the paperwork would be an issue. So I knew, I was like, I'll get caught at some point. And if I have to go get someone beer and my fake ID gets taken, because let me just say, it wasn't great.
Yeah. Were you Nick Papagiorgio from Yuma? Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. I was Mick Levin from Hawaii.
Nice. That in and of itself, the fact that you thought through the consequences defines you as a human being. Because most people would not have gone as far as to extrapolate, oh, this could go horribly wrong if I end up having to use it to go get beer and I get caught. And now I'm calling the studio not only without the beer, but from a police station because I've been arrested. Only you would have thought. That is an engineer's mindset right there, is if I just take this little extra step and wait, I won't have that problem. So kudos to you, man. But it's still, I had a feeling maybe you thought about it. I had a feeling like, maybe we should look into this. Well, look, you have been so kind and gracious to us with your time. Thank you for everything. We seriously, we're, like everyone we talk to, we're always kind of humbled and honored that we get to be counted in your company. So we're just grateful and we appreciate you, and we're here to support you any way we can. And we'll keep doing anything we can to get the word out about you as much as you want us to get the word out about you, because you're a man of mystery, secrets. It's a wonderful thing. But thank you seriously for your time. And I hope that we haven't taken up too much of your day with this.
No, thanks for having me. It's been really, really great to talk to you, and really reflective as well. I feel like I just did some therapy. So
good. My time has been well spent. Now I'm going to take your job and put it in my bottom drawer with all those other jobs.
Perfect.
Listen, Jacob, have a great day. And we look forward to talking to you soon, man.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Peace out.